In 1957, the body of a young boy was discovered in a cardboard box on the side of a lonely road in Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood. He had no name, no identity, and no family to claim him. Investigators called him, simply, the boy in the box. Decades passed, but the haunting questions surrounding this child remained unanswered. Who was he? How did he end up there? And why did no one ever come forward to claim him? This case became one of the most enduring mysteries in American history, a story that gripped a community, baffled generations of detectives, and symbolized the silent tragedy of forgotten children. For 65 years, the boy remained nameless, his life and death shrouded in mystery, until a breakthrough in 2022 finally gave him back his identity: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But even with a name, the questions don't stop. How did Joseph end up in that box? Who was responsible for his tragic fate? And why did it take so long for the truth to emerge? This is not just a story about a nameless child. It's a story about the persistence of justice, the dedication of those who never gave up, and the incredible power of modern science to uncover the truth. Welcome to the True Crime Chronicles, where we dig deep into the world of true crime, exploring the stories that shock, puzzle, and ultimately remind us of the enduring human search for answers. Join us as we uncover the chilling tale of the boy in the box, a story of mystery, heartbreak, and the relentless pursuit of justice. To understand the tragedy of the boy in the box, we must first piece together the fragments of his short and mysterious life. A life that ended long before it should have and left behind more questions than answers. The boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, was small for his age. He weighed just 30 pounds, malnourished, his ribs showing signs of prolonged starvation. His body bore marks of a difficult life. Bruises covered his pale skin, and his arms and legs carried scars that spoke of repeated abuse. His hair had been cut roughly and hastily, with clumps left behind, as though someone had been trying to obscure his identity. He was found naked, wrapped in a flannel blanket, placed inside a discarded cardboard box originally used to ship a baby bassinet. No toys, no clothes, nothing to indicate who he was or where he came from. He was nameless, faceless, a silent victim of a world that failed him. In an era before DNA testing or digital records, identifying this boy was nearly impossible. Investigators relied on rudimentary tools: fingerprints, photographs, and dental records. Despite their best efforts, no missing child reports matched his description, leaving detectives with a haunting question. How could a child disappear so completely, without a single person stepping forward to claim him? Philadelphia in the 1950s was a city of contrasts. Bustling urban neighborhoods gave way to quiet, rural outskirts. Fox Chase, where the boy was discovered, was one such area, a sparsely populated stretch of farmland and woods. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and strangers stood out. The body was found near Susquehanna Road, an unpaved, isolated stretch often used as a dumping ground for trash. It was here, amidst the debris and overgrown weeds, that a young muskrat hunter stumbled upon the cardboard box and its grim contents. In a time when families left their doors unlocked and children played freely in the streets, the discovery of the boy sent shockwaves through the community. How could something so horrific happen in a place that seemed so safe? With no identity for the boy, investigators turned their attention to the question of who might have been responsible for his death. Early theories focused on the local community. Could it have been a neighbor, someone who knew the area well enough to choose such a secluded spot? Another theory pointed to nearby orphanages. During this time, orphanages were often overcrowded and poorly regulated. Some speculated that the boy may have been one of their wards, abandoned to hide evidence of neglect or abuse. Others suggested darker possibilities: human trafficking or illegal adoption rings. In the 1950s, the underground trade of children was not uncommon, and authorities considered whether the boy had been a victim of such a network, discarded when he was no longer needed. Desperate for leads, the police issued public appeals, distributing thousands of posters and flyers with the boy's image. Yet despite these efforts, no one came forward. No parent claimed him. No witness remembered seeing him alive. The silence surrounding this case was deafening. For years, the investigators held on to hope, pursuing every lead, no matter how small. But each path seemed to end the same way, with more questions and no answers. The boy became not just a victim, but a symbol of all the children who slipped through society's cracks, their stories untold, their lives forgotten. It was February 25th, 1957, a day that began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Fox Chase, Philadelphia. The air was crisp, and the streets were still, but it was about to become a day that would forever be etched in the minds of those who would hear of it. A young man, out on a muskrat hunting trip, was walking along Susquehanna Road when he stumbled upon something that would change everything. As he wandered through the woods, he came across what seemed like an unusual sight, a cardboard box. It was tucked away in a thicket of brush, partially hidden by the undergrowth. What seemed like an ordinary piece of discarded trash, however, would soon reveal a shocking discovery. The box was not empty. It contained the lifeless body of a small child. The boy was lying motionless inside, his small body curled in an unnatural position, wrapped in a faded, fraying blanket. The box, a simple, everyday object, had become the final resting place for this child, a nameless, forsaken victim of an unforgiving world. At first, he didn't know what to think, but the weight of the discovery soon became clear. He immediately ran to the nearest house, breathless and panicked, shouting for help. The authorities were called, and within moments, the quiet of Fox Chase would be shattered by the arrival of police officers, investigators, and medical personnel. The scene that greeted the officers was one of confusion and horror. There was no sign of how the boy had come to be there. No footprints leading to the box. No witnesses. No vehicle tracks. It was as if he had materialized out of thin air, dropped off in that isolated spot, and left to be forgotten by the world. The cardboard box itself was a simple, unremarkable thing. It had been used to ship a baby bassinet, the kind of box that could easily be overlooked. But inside it, the boy's body was a silent cry for attention that no one had heard. Wrapped in a threadbare quilt, he looked almost small enough to fit in a doll's cradle. But the reality of his condition was far from innocent. The boy was bruised, his face and body marked by the unmistakable signs of abuse. His pale skin was mottled with injuries, some recent, some old. But the most disturbing detail of all was the haircut, ragged and amateurish, as if someone had tried to cut his hair in a hurry, perhaps to erase a clue. Strands of dark hair were scattered on the box, providing one of the few pieces of evidence left behind. The most chilling aspect of the scene was the boy's apparent neglect. His body was underweight, and his hands were so small and frail that they seemed to have never been given the chance to play or hold anything of warmth. He had been discarded with little care, his life reduced to nothing more than a piece of forgotten baggage. Despite the thorough search of the surrounding area, investigators found no evidence to point them toward any suspects. No footprints in the mud, no traces of the person who had left the boy there. The only tangible clues were the quilt he had been wrapped in and the strands of hair found near the body. The lack of any significant evidence made the crime even more perplexing. How could someone dispose of a child in such a way and then vanish without a trace? The discovery quickly caught the attention of the local media. In a time when television news was still in its infancy, print media was the primary source of information. The headlines screamed for answers, with newspapers across the city carrying stories of the boy in the box, as he came to be known. The boy's identity remained a mystery, and the public was gripped by the chilling notion that a child could vanish so completely, with no one stepping forward to claim him. Local citizens were shaken by the discovery. The tight-knit community of Fox Chase, where most residents knew each other by name, struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could occur in their own backyard. Everyone who saw the story wanted to help. Parents combed through their own neighborhoods, wondering if anyone could be missing a child. The police, too, were desperate to find leads, releasing sketches of the boy's face and circulating them to hospitals, orphanages, and missing persons departments. But despite their best efforts, no one came forward with information. A wave of media coverage spread beyond Philadelphia. The story captured the attention of the nation, leaving viewers across the country wondering who this boy was and where he had come from. Yet, despite all the media exposure, the boy's identity remained an elusive mystery. His face, immortalized in composite sketches, became a symbol of unrelenting tragedy and confusion. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation seemed to stall. The boy's tragic death haunted the minds of detectives, but no clear answers emerged. The case grew colder with each passing day, and the public's attention began to shift to other stories. Yet, the police never stopped looking for the answers. What had happened to this child? Who had abandoned him? And why? And more than anything, what would it take to finally unravel the mystery that had haunted the city of Philadelphia for over 6 decades? With no immediate answers to the boy and the box's identity or cause of death, the investigation quickly turned to theory. Who was this child? And how had he come to meet such a tragic end? In the absence of concrete evidence, detectives began to explore several possibilities, each theory bringing with it new hope, but none offering the closure they desperately sought. One of the earliest theories to gain traction was the possibility that the boy had been an illegitimate child, perhaps hidden away by a family trying to avoid scandal. In the 1950s, society often placed immense pressure on parents to conceal children born out of wedlock, and such a theory would explain the boy's abandonment in a secluded area, far from the prying eyes of society. Was this child a secret, hidden away to preserve a family's reputation? It was a theory that seemed plausible at first, but as detectives followed the trail, they hit a wall. No family came forward, and no missing child reports matched the boy's description. Another chilling possibility centered around local orphanages. In a time when orphanages were overcrowded and underfunded, could this child have been abandoned by one of these institutions? Some speculated that he was a victim of a larger scandal, caught up in the neglect and mistreatment of children in these institutions. Was he taken from an orphanage and discarded when no one noticed he was missing? This theory was complicated by the lack of records or complaints from any of the local orphanages. Investigators found no evidence linking them to the boy, and no staff members reported any missing children. The third and most sinister theory was that the boy had been kidnapped, taken from his family by someone who had no intention of keeping him alive. Perhaps he had been sold into a trafficking ring or stolen for a ransom that never came. In this scenario, the boy would have been disposed of when his captors realized they could gain no further benefit from him. Could this child have been a victim of such a crime? While police worked tirelessly to follow up on every lead, they never uncovered a solid connection to any organized ring. Theories like these, though chilling, failed to explain the deeper mystery of how the boy had been left alone to die in such a cold and desolate place. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the boy's origins, the detectives never stopped seeking answers. They scoured local stores for clues, trying to trace the quilt and cardboard box that had been found with the boy's body. Could these everyday items lead them to a breakthrough? The box, it turned out, was not a unique item. It had originally been used to ship a baby bassinet, a product available at several local department stores. Investigators traced its origin, hoping to uncover a lead. Perhaps the box had been purchased by someone nearby, someone with knowledge of the boy. But each attempt hit a dead end. No one could identify the person who had bought the bassinet, nor the store where it had been sold. Faced with the lack of evidence, investigators turned to new methods for identifying the boy. Using a technique that was still in its infancy, they created facial reconstructions based on his skull, hoping to reveal some clue about his identity. Composite sketches were circulated to newspapers and television stations, showing a face that had become both iconic and heartbreaking. Despite the extensive efforts to reconstruct his image, the boy's identity remained elusive. He was someone, yet no one seemed to know who. Detectives were left to wonder, was he from Philadelphia? Or had he been brought in from somewhere far away, discarded in this quiet corner of the world? As years passed and the case grew colder, the detectives who had worked the case still carried its weight. Many had become personally invested in solving the mystery, and they would reflect on it years later, haunted by the unanswered questions. Retired detective, interview excerpt. I remember feeling like we were so close. We would talk to anyone who might have seen something. We'd check every lead, every tip, no matter how small. But after a while, you begin to feel like you're chasing ghosts. And with each dead end, it just became harder to stay hopeful. The detectives weren't the only ones who had theories. Local witnesses, too, speculated about the boy's origins. Some thought he had been the victim of a local family. possibly raised in an abusive home. Others wondered if he had been part of a larger pattern of missing children that had gone unnoticed. Despite their best efforts, the investigation was marked by one dead end after another. False confessions came in, some from people claiming they had seen the boy with someone or even had knowledge of the crime. But each one fell apart upon further investigation. With the limitations of 1950s technology, detectives struggled to cross-check information. DNA testing, fingerprint databases, and digital tracking systems were still decades away. Each clue, each theory, was built on shaky foundations, leaving investigators frustrated and emotionally drained. The boy's case seemed destined to remain unsolved, a tragic symbol of the failure to uncover the truth. But the dedication of the investigators never waned. Even as the case grew colder, the boy in the box remained in the back of their minds. They couldn't let him be forgotten. And for some, the haunting image of that boy's face would continue to push them to find the answers that had eluded them for so long. After more than 6 decades of frustration, the boy in the box case had slipped from the public's attention. The cold case file sat gathering dust, relegated to the archives of unsolved mysteries. But then, something remarkable happened. Advancements in modern forensics, specifically genetic genealogy, offered a glimmer of hope. In the early 21st century, the tools that had eluded investigators in the 1950s were now at their fingertips. Genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge field of forensic science, allowed investigators to approach the case in an entirely new way. This technique, which combines traditional DNA analysis with family tree research, had already been used in other high-profile cases, including the identification of the Golden State Killer. And now, it was about to be applied to the case of the boy in the box. In 2019, a team of dedicated investigators, now armed with these new forensic tools, reopened the case. They took DNA samples from the boy's remains, samples that had been preserved in evidence bags for over 60 years, and began the painstaking process of genetic analysis. Using cutting-edge DNA technology, they were able to create a genetic profile of the boy. But the breakthrough came not from matching the boy's DNA to an existing criminal database, but through the novel use of genetic genealogy. By comparing the boy's DNA with publicly available databases, investigators began to trace distant relatives. This process was time-consuming and complex, but it was the key that unlocked the mystery. The genealogists and investigators worked tirelessly, navigating through layers of family connections. In a monumental moment, they were able to trace the boy's lineage back to a family in the Philadelphia area. The genetic trail led them to a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The boy, who had been abandoned in a box along a desolate road, was finally given his name. He was Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born on January 13, 1953, in Philadelphia. Joseph had a family, a name, a history. He was no longer just the boy in the box. He was Joseph. The announcement sent shockwaves through the public. For 65 years, Joseph's identity had been a haunting mystery. And now, finally, after so many years of searching, the case had been solved. The emotional impact of this revelation was palpable. It wasn't just the investigators who had waited for this moment. It was the people of Philadelphia, the nation, and anyone who had followed the case over the years. Reporter, soundbite. Today, the mystery that has haunted Philadelphia for over 6 decades has been solved. Joseph Augustus Zarelli, the boy in the box, has a name. His family has been located, and he will no longer be forgotten. For those who had followed the case closely, the emotional weight of the announcement was overwhelming. Detectives who had worked tirelessly for years spoke of the relief they felt upon learning the boy's true identity. Retired detectives, who had once walked away from the case with no answers, now had the closure they had so desperately sought. Police chief, soundbite. For decades, we've carried the burden of not knowing who Joseph was. Today, we can finally tell his story, and we can tell his family that he has not been forgotten. We owe it to Joseph to give him the dignity he deserved all along. For the public, the revelation was both joyous and sorrowful. On one hand, there was the immense satisfaction of knowing that the boy's identity had been uncovered. But on the other, there was the deep sorrow that such a young life had been lost in such a tragic and senseless way. Joseph's family, long unaware of his fate, was finally able to grieve for the child they had lost. Through the groundbreaking efforts of modern forensics, they were able to learn the heartbreaking truth about his life. Joseph Augustus Zarelli's family was notified, and for the first time, they were able to lay claim to their long-lost loved one. The pain of his family was undeniable, but there was also a sense of relief, knowing that after 65 years, they could finally say goodbye, giving Joseph the dignity he had been denied for so long. His name was spoken aloud, and he was no longer just a cold case. He was a person, a son, a brother, and a child who mattered. The breakthrough in this case wasn't just about uncovering the boy's name. It was about the relentless pursuit of justice and the application of modern science to solve the unsolvable. It was a testament to the progress of forensic science and the unyielding hope of those who believed, no matter how long it took, that Joseph would not be forgotten. And so, the mystery of the boy in the box finally came to an end. The name of Joseph Augustus Zarelli will forever be remembered. But the story doesn't end here. There are still questions that remain. What happened to Joseph in the days before his death? And what led to his tragic end? Those questions still linger, even as his identity has been revealed. But for now, we can take comfort in knowing that Joseph, the boy in the box, has a name that will carry with it the hope that, no matter how long it takes, the truth always finds a way to come to light. Joseph Augustus Zarelli's identification was a breakthrough that gave closure to a case that had haunted the city of Philadelphia for over 6 decades. But while Joseph's family could finally put a name to the boy in the box, the aftermath of this discovery rippled far beyond his family. It raised questions about justice, the perseverance of law enforcement, and the power of modern forensic science. For Joseph's surviving family members, the identification was a bittersweet moment. After more than 6 decades of uncertainty, they learned the truth about their long-lost relative. Yet, the pain of his tragic death was always with them, and they chose to remain largely private, shying away from the media spotlight. The emotional weight of this revelation was heavy. After all, they were now able to grieve for someone they had not been able to mourn for all those years. Though they were given some closure, it was clear that Joseph's family was still reeling from the years of uncertainty. Their privacy was respected, with many choosing not to speak publicly about their loss. But their reactions were heard in the form of quiet gratitude towards those who worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. For the investigators who had worked on the case, Joseph's identification was a victory many thought they would never see. Retired detectives spoke of how the case had weighed heavily on them, how the mystery had followed them for years, and how they had often wondered whether they would ever learn the boy's name. The emotional toll had been profound. After all, this was a case unlike any other, a case that had haunted an entire city, baffling those in law enforcement who believed in justice. The breakthrough was also a moment of deep reflection for the public. Citizens of Philadelphia, who had followed the case for decades, felt a profound sense of closure. The boy in the box had been a mystery that everyone knew, but no one had the answers to. For many, it was a story they never thought they would hear the end of, and now, finally, they knew the boy's name. But even in this moment of triumph, a nagging question remained. What really happened to Joseph before his tragic death? The identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli also had a lasting impact on society, particularly in the realm of criminal investigations. This case marked a turning point in how cold cases were handled and solved. The use of genetic genealogy in identifying Joseph was a direct result of the advancements made in forensic technology over the past several decades. Before this breakthrough, many cold cases seemed destined to remain unsolved, the evidence too old, the leads too cold. But Joseph's case proved that with the right technology, no case is truly unsolvable. This moment sparked a revolution in how law enforcement and forensic scientists approached old cases. From that point on, genetic genealogy became a powerful tool in solving not only other cold cases, but also in identifying unknown victims. The science, which once seemed like science fiction, was now a reality, and it was changing the face of criminal investigations. As more cases were being reopened using the same methods, there was a renewed sense of hope for victims whose stories had been buried by time. The Zarelli case gave new life to other cold investigations and ignited an undeniable confidence in the persistence of justice. If Joseph could be identified after 65 years, who else could be found? But even with Joseph's identification, many unanswered questions still remain. The mystery surrounding his death is far from resolved. Though the boy's name was finally discovered, the circumstances of his life and his death are still shrouded in darkness. Who was responsible for his death? What happened in the days leading up to his abandonment? Was Joseph a victim of a broken system, an illicit child taken from an orphanage, or someone's lost son who suffered in silence for years? These are questions that continue to linger. The investigation into his death may have found his name, but the story of how he came to be alone in that box is still incomplete. Despite the advances in technology, the mystery surrounding Joseph's final days has not been solved. Investigators are still uncertain about the exact circumstances that led to his death. Though many theories abound, no definitive answers have been found. Who was responsible for Joseph's death? Was he abused in a way that led to his tragic end? Or was he simply another forgotten child in a world that had let him slip through the cracks? We may never fully know the answers, and it's a haunting thought. The story of Joseph Augustus Zarelli, the boy in the box, is a tragic reminder of how vulnerable some children are, and how important it is to fight for the truth, no matter how long it takes. Though we may never have all the answers, one thing is certain: Joseph will never be forgotten again. For every case that has been solved, there are many more that remain unsolved, victims whose stories are buried beneath time and shadows. Joseph's case is not just about finding answers for one boy. It's a call to action. It's a reminder of how vital it is to continue supporting advancements in forensic science, especially genetic genealogy, and to continue fighting for justice for all victims, whether they are nameless or known. Cold cases are not just stories. They are real lives that were cut short too soon. As viewers, we have the power to help keep their stories alive by sharing, discussing, and supporting initiatives that advance forensic technology. The future of justice depends on our continued commitment to these cases and the families who are waiting for the truth. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most perplexing and emotional cold cases in history. The identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli is a moment of triumph, but it also reminds us of the long road ahead for countless other victims still waiting for justice. We encourage you to share your thoughts, theories, and reflections in the comments below. Could Joseph's story have been solved sooner? What do you think about the role modern science plays in solving these cases? We want to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching. Until next time, let us keep seeking the truth together, one story at a time.